The words hung in the air, not like a pronouncement, but like a judgment that had been rendered long ago, and I was only just now hearing the verdict. You've made too many enemies here. It wasn't said with anger, or even regret. It was delivered with the flat, almost bored finality of a seasoned bureaucrat stamping a rejection letter. My stomach lurched, a cold, sickening wave washing over me. I remember the faint scent of lemon polish from his desk, the way the afternoon sun glinted off the framed diploma on the wall, the silence that stretched, punctuated only by the distant hum of office machinery. He didn't elaborate, didn't offer examples, didn't ask for my perspective. He simply leaned back, his fingers steepled, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, as if he were enjoying a private joke. And then, he said, "We'll need to let you go." The severance package details were delivered with the same detached efficiency, a stark contrast to the seismic shift that was occurring within me. My life, before that moment, had been a meticulously constructed facade. I joined the company 5 years ago, full of ambition and a desperate need to prove myself. My boss, or rather, boss, the man who now held my professional fate in his hands, had a reputation. Charismatic, brilliant, but also, ruthless. He cultivated an environment where loyalty was a commodity, and dissent was a capital offense. I'd tried to navigate it, to play the game. I'd learned to keep my head down, to offer just enough to be valuable, but not enough to be a threat. I'd witnessed his methods, the quiet disposals of people who dared to question him, the subtle manipulations that left individuals questioning their own sanity. There was the time Sarah, a brilliant analyst, had proposed a radical new strategy that threatened to disrupt his established order. He'd listened, nodded, even praised her initiative. A week later, she was reassigned to a dead-end department, her project quietly shelved. He'd explained it away as a strategic realignment, a move that benefited the bigger picture. Sarah had cried in the break room, her spirit visibly broken. I'd offered her a tissue, a quiet word of comfort, but inside, a knot of unease had tightened. Then there was Mark, who had accidentally uncovered a minor accounting discrepancy that reflected poorly on a project favored by the CEO. Mark was a good guy, a little too earnest, a little too by the book. He tried to address it internally, to be transparent. The CEO had called him into his office, and afterward, Mark had emerged pale and shaken. He'd stopped speaking up in meetings, his once vibrant energy replaced by a nervous twitch. He left the company 6 months later, citing personal reasons. I'd seen the CEO's satisfied smirk when Mark's departure was announced, a ghost of a triumph in his eyes. These weren't isolated incidents, they were patterns. And I, in my own quiet way, had become an observer, a silent witness to the toxic ecosystem he fostered. I'd learned to smile, to nod, to agree, all while a part of me recoiled. I hadn't made enemies, not in the traditional sense. I hadn't been loud, or confrontational. But I had seen. And I had not participated. Perhaps, in his eyes, that was its own form of opposition. The day it happened, the air in the CEO's office felt unusually heavy. It was late Thursday afternoon, the kind of time when most people were mentally packing up for the weekend. I'd been called in unexpectedly, a brief, curt email from his executive assistant. I'd walked in, my usual professional demeanor firmly in place, expecting perhaps a new project assignment, or a review of my performance. Instead, I was met with that chilling pronouncement. He sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, the same one where I'd defended my projects, where I'd received praise and subtle criticism. The sunlight, which had seemed benign just moments before, now felt harsh, exposing the polished emptiness of the room. He gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing, a primal instinct telling me not to settle in, not to get comfortable. "You've made too many enemies here," he repeated, his voice low, almost a murmur. I felt a peculiar detachment, as if I were watching a scene unfold from a distance. My mind, however, was racing, trying to grasp the meaning. Enemies? Who? I'd always prided myself on being a team player, on fostering positive working relationships. I thought about my colleagues, the occasional disagreements, the minor office politics, but nothing that constituted genuine enmity. He continued, his gaze unwavering. "People don't trust you. They see you as manipulative. The word landed like a blow. Manipulative? I was the one who had to navigate the manipulations, not enact them. They say you play both sides, that you're not loyal. He paused, letting the accusations hang. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask for specifics, to defend myself, but he raised a hand. Stoppin'. Gee me. It's not about specific incidents, he said, as if reading my thoughts. It's a pattern. A perception. And it's impacting the team dynamics. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. The confidence I'd projected for years began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing vulnerability. I looked around the office, at the expensive artwork on the walls, the sleek minimalist furniture, and for the first time it felt sterile, devoid of warmth. This was his domain, his carefully curated kingdom, and I was an outsider, an anomaly. He didn't see my hard work, my dedication, the sacrifices I'd made. He only saw what he wanted to see, filtered through the lens of his own agenda. Then came the final pronouncement, delivered with the same dispassionate tone. We've decided it's best for everyone if you move on. We'll prepare a severance package for you. The world tilted. The floor seemed to drop away. I remember the silence that followed, not an empty silence, but one filled with the weight of his words, the finality of it all. My carefully constructed world shattered, not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating implosion. The walk back to my desk felt like an eternity. The office hummed with its usual energy, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in my life. My colleagues smiled and nodded, their faces a blur. I could feel their eyes on me, their curiosity, their silent judgment. The severance details, cold and impersonal, lay on my desk, a tangible symbol of my dismissal. I didn't cry. I didn't lash out. A chilling calm descended upon me, a stillness that felt alien and powerful. I packed my personal belongings with deliberate slowness, each item a small act of reclaiming myself from this place. The framed photo of my family, the worn leather notebook, the small, potted plant I'd nurtured on my windowsill. Each went into a nondescript cardboard box. I didn't confront anyone, didn't seek explanations. The damage was done. The realization that dawned on me was simple and profound. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't fully understand, a game he played with ruthless precision. My silence, my quiet endurance, had been misinterpreted as complicity or, worse, as a hidden agenda. He had projected his own Machiavellian nature onto me, and in doing so, had judged me by his own standards. As I gathered my things, I noticed a small, almost imperceptible change in his demeanor when he delivered the news. It wasn't just confidence, it was a smug satisfaction, a hunter who had successfully cornered his prey. He believed he had outmaneuvered me, that he had exposed my supposed treachery. He was wrong. My enemies weren't people I'd harmed, but rather the system he represented, the values he trampled. And I had silently observed, documented, and waited. The following weeks were a blur of legal consultations and strategic planning. I wasn't angry, I was methodical. I had, over the years, quietly gathered evidence. Not in a dramatic, Hollywood-esque fashion, but through diligent record-keeping. Emails detailing dubious decisions, anonymous tips from disgruntled employees that I had meticulously filed away, discrepancies I had noticed and documented without acting upon them, knowing one day they might be relevant. I hadn't acted out of malice, but out of a deep-seated sense of unease, a premonition that something was fundamentally wrong. I reached out to a lawyer specializing in employment law, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened intently as I laid out my case. I didn't embellish, I didn't exaggerate. I presented the facts, the timeline, the pattern of behavior that had led to my dismissal. The key was not the accusation of making enemies, but the fabricated reasons behind it. The CEO had used a vague, unsubstantiated claim to mask a more insidious motive, perhaps silencing someone who knew too much, or simply weeding out anyone who didn't fit his rigid vision of corporate loyalty. The day we filed the lawsuit, I felt a strange sense of liberation. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. It was about ensuring that his narrative, his carefully crafted illusion of control, was dismantled piece by piece. I didn't need to storm his office or make grand pronouncements. I had something far more powerful: proof. The legal process was arduous, but with each document filed, each deposition taken, the CEO's composure began to fray. His public statements shifted from confident pronouncements to defensive rebuttals. His carefully cultivated image began to crack. The enemies he claimed I had made started to surface, not as accusers, but as witnesses. People who had suffered under his leadership, who had been sidelined or demoralized, were willing to corroborate my account. The initial shock and outrage from his allies quickly turned to unease as the evidence mounted. The pivotal moment came during a deposition. Under oath, when pressed about the specific enemies I had made, the CEO faltered. He stammered, he equivocated, he pointed to vague reports and hearsay. He could not provide a single concrete example that stood up to scrutiny. He looked cornered, his arrogance dissolving into desperation. I watched a recording of it later, the image of his face contorted with a mixture of panic and fury. It was a silent scream, a visible manifestation of his crumbling empire. The settlement was not public, but the whispers were enough. The company faced a significant financial penalty, and more importantly, a stain on its reputation. The CEO, once lauded as a visionary leader, was suddenly pariah. Board members began to distance themselves. Investors expressed concern. His power, built on fear and manipulation, proved to be as fragile as a house of cards. The enemies he believed I had made were now the very people who helped expose his flaws. The aftermath was quiet. There were no frantic calls from him, no attempts at reconciliation. He had made his choice, and he had lost. His friends, the ones who had benefited from his reign, found new patrons. My former colleagues, the ones who had remained silent, either moved on or learned to tread more carefully. I received a few tentative messages from people I'd worked with, expressing their support and admiration, their words a quiet balm. But I didn't dwell on the past. My own life began to rebuild, slowly and deliberately. I found a new role in a different industry, one that valued integrity and collaboration. The experience had changed me, of course. The naive ambition had been replaced by a hard-won wisdom. I learned that true power lies not in domination, but in resilience. And that sometimes, the most profound form of justice isn't delivered with a shout, but with a silent, unwavering resolve. The satisfaction wasn't in his downfall, but in the quiet certainty that the truth, however long it took, had a way of asserting itself. The CEO's words, meant to be a final nail in my coffin, had inadvertently become the catalyst for his own undoing. And in the silence that followed, there was a profound, unshakable peace.